Welcome to WiscoDice. Hey, yo, folks, I am your host, Cozy with the Most, and I am joined today by...
Hey, this is Justin, the Meeples champion.
This is Matt, the Ghost Walker.
And I'm Suzanne.
And this is episode 123 of the WiscoDice Tabletop Gaming Podcast. And today is June 1st, 2024. On today's episode, we're going to talk about all of those favorite Euro games of ours. So with that, let's roll into our main topic. But first, Suzanne, why don't you start things off by helping us understand what a Euro game is?
Sure, happy to do this. So Euro games have also been known as German games in the past, but Euro games don't have to be published in Germany, all right, or even Europe. They could be published here in the United States and still be considered a Euro style game. These games are ones that generally focus on some sort of player interaction and player strategy, and not as much on like the luck of the draw or luck of dice rolling and conflict between players. This conflict on the board. Outside of the game, sitting at the table, yelling at each other, that conflict may still occur. Player interaction in the game is usually more indirect with how your actions will impact another player's actions and abilities to score points. And the scoring points portion of it, it's not just a single way. There is multiple ways, multiple paths you can focus on to score points through the game. So, and then last but not least, there's also usually some little bit of an abstract component to this game. It's not as abstract as, say, like chess or some other abstract games, but there is an element of it. And as I mentioned before, like the luck is not part of it. So any randomness that's introduced into the game, such as rolling dice, shuffling a deck of cards, a lot of times will exclude a game from being called a Euro game, even if it meets the other criteria. They're just like any genre of games that we have. There's some that are more complex than others, some that are more intro friendly or lighter. But Euro games, they span the gamut of that. As for example, some well-known games that are Euro games that are Puerto Rico, Lords of Waterdeep, Agricola, and Zolkin. So those are just a few of the ones to kind of get you an idea of what is fitting this Euro game genre. But we all have our favorite games here at WiscoDice that fit the Euro game, and we thought it'd be fun to go through and talk through what our favorites are and have some discussion on that today. So, Matt, did you have a favorite Euro game that you enjoy?
I do. So it's one I actually played very recently, and it's Brass Lancashire by Roxley Games. It was originally published under the title of Brass, I think back in 2007 or somewhere around there. It centers around building a manufacturing empire during the Industrial Revolution. So the game is really divided up into two different sort of timelines. The initial phase of the game occurs during the time of shipping in England when they used a lot of the rivers and canals, and everything was done via shipping lanes that way. So players need to spend their time building connections between cities and to help improve their control of coal, cotton, and metal during those time frames. So, and the turn order every turn is determined based on who spent money during the previous turn. So the person who spent the least amount of money gets to go first the next turn. And it's sort of figured out that way. So, and the later phases of the game occurs when you basically hit a time period and you shift, and the advent of the rail network occurs. So at this point, the shipping via ships and canals becomes obsolete. It's just not as efficient as doing rail transport. So now you're competing with your other players to build rail networks across England and the area of Lancashire. And then basically, it is a Euro from the perspective of you are only getting 2 actions per turn. So it's about action economy. Did I pick the right 2 actions? And you're going to choose to do things like build factories, connect cities, upgrade the effectiveness of your factories. And as time progresses, you're trying to build your income because you may not always have easy access to, say, the metal you want to do an upgrade or to build that next connection. So you can buy it off of another player, you can buy it off of the market. And so using those types of things, you're managing your economic engine, building your money and building your factories so that you have more access to build things quicker. It's one I recently was introduced to this. Although I have played it a couple different times, I'm pretty sure I've played both Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire. I've just really enjoyed both the games both times. I would say this one is probably on the lighter side of Euros. It's not super heavy, but there is a good bit of complexity just with managing your upgrades, managing your connections, and realizing that at some point everything you built is going to be wiped out and you're going to be starting over with a whole new network with building things with rails and all sorts of things. So how about you guys? What have you thought of Brass Lancashire, and what are your opinions?
So I will say, sadly, I have not had a chance to play Brass Lancashire or Brass Birmingham, which is the newer edition, I believe. Definitely on my list of stuff I want to play. But I'm curious, what kind of solidifies this for you as a favorite? Is there like a particular mechanic that stands out for you? Is it the theme? Like, what's kind of what really
I,
gets you with this
I
one?
I think in this one it's somewhat the theme. I like that there's sort of a transition in the middle where yes, you're building an engine and your engine sort of does continue, but there's a little bit of a reset. So if you kind of mess up the first half a little bit, you still have lots of opportunity in the second half to kind of make a shift and learn from what you did in the first half and like make a comeback in the second half. So I don't know why. The theme just sits with me. I just enjoy it. So
Nice, yeah.
So I'll say with this game, I do enjoy this game. It does not get to our table too often, and I think part of that is I don't play it enough to feel like I'm an expert enough to explain it to a new player. There's not a lot of iconography or similar actions that you see repeatedly in other games that a new player can be like, "Oh, sure, here's my little player aid, and I can figure a lot of this out." So it does kind of feel a little complicated at times. One of the things that does cause this game to fall into a Euro game I enjoy is the player interaction portion of it. So it's that indirect player interaction. You build something here, I may or may not be able to use it, or it's going to stop me from being able to play it there. And rarely when I've played the game do I intentionally build something with the fact it's going to block someone else. It's more for my benefit. So there's that indirect player interaction that can really help or hinder other people. So I don't know, Conza, you're the one who got me this game and brought it into our
I
house.
did.
So
Yeah, so I did. I think it was a birthday present or something like that, and it was on
yep.
your like really hot list of games you wanted to try at the time. So I'm glad we bought it. For whatever reason, the game seems like it's really hard for us to get to the table. And I think some of that is that I've really, really enjoyed playing this game. I can see absolutely why Brass is one of those games that's in that like upper echelon top like 10-ish games on on Board Game Geek. It's I think Birmingham has kind of floated for number one the past couple of years. But when I play this game, I don't know, for some reason I just feel gritty, dirty, like I just got done working in a Victorian factory, and I think that's really good for the theme because that's exactly the theme of the game. But like my mental headspace of like, hey, I just worked 12 hours in a Victorian factory with child labor and
There's no
things
child
like that.
labor in this.
Oh, it's
Am I
there. You just
No,
missing
don't see
it?
it.
it's not in the game. Like
It's
it's not
implied.
in the game, but that is
Okay.
like what
I'm
I
like,
think
wait,
of
maybe I'm
when
missing a
I'm
big part of this game.
like that is a big thing of Victorian labor, right? I mean, that's just
Yeah.
that's an unfortunate
There's
reality
no
of what
cubes
history
where you
was.
have a family that's doing
No, the
things or
game
what.
doesn't represent it at
No.
all.
Okay.
Absolutely, but it's
Just want to make that clear.
it's that connection I make in my head if when I play the game is that like I delve into this like the historical element of the Victorian era,
There was a lot of
it,
child labor and
yeah.
things like that.
Well,
Yeah.
not just that, but like that whatever that whole period of time, and I also think of like one of my favorite authors, Tolkien, and how like some of the things he wrote about in his thoughts were about that period of history being, kind of destroying and eating the beautiful green spaces and whatever, right? And so you like there's all of these things. So I like unfortunately for me, I think the theme I end up putting in my head, and when I get done playing the game, I end up with this feeling of negativity almost towards that theme, while the underlying game is just absolutely brilliant. And that's probably when I say when it's hard to table, I think it's one of those games that for me I go to grab last because it evokes some of those feelings, which are all in my head, right? I mean, it absolutely is. It has nothing to do mechanically with how the game is presented or what the game is doing. It's just the era that it's depicting, and that is really that's triggering those thoughts. So absolutely, the gameplay itself though is brilliant. I don't want to come off and say, hey, this Matt, or anybody that picked a game that's not. Or if you like Brass, you're picking the wrong game because of that theme. No, this is all in my head, right? Brass is an absolute brilliant mechanical game. I absolutely can see why you picked it, Matt. It's absolutely like when you think Euro games, great Euro games, Brass is definitely right there. It is an amazing technical Euro game.
Well, and I think that's a good point, though. I mean, we all have our own opinions, and sometimes those opinions are driven based on just a background or history in our head, and sometimes the theme just leaves us with a bad taste for whatever reason. Like you said, technically a great game, just in your head, it just goes there, which is
It's
fine.
just
I
this
mean,
weird headspace thing with me,
Mhm.
and that actually goes to other Victorian age set games too. I just, for whatever reason, they don't click with me or they don't
yeah.
resonate because of some of those thoughts.
It's so strange because when I play Brass, I think how cool it is that they're building these shipping lines and that, we're moving forward in history and now we're building these type of shipping lines and increasing the production and
Mhm.
spreading, this ingenuity and connecting people. I think of it as this like great advancement in that game and interesting how it's advancing. And you're like, no, it's just such a different, like, opinion, like, of what you're looking at and getting from it than what I'm taking from it, so
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, right?
Mhm.
yep. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, yeah. So, now I guess I know to not play with you, and just for the record, this was not necessarily on my top games to play or try. I was creating a list that you found of games that I was listening to on a podcast that they were recommending that I hadn't played.
Hmm.
So, I didn't
Oh.
even know anything about it, and you got
Well, I thought it was a
anyways,
great pick.
yeah, no, it
no,
is it's a good pick, and
it's a great
Ugh.
pick.
so we'll have to get it out sometime, Justin, so you can experience it.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, I've heard so many good things about it, and
Mhm.
I know it's recommended by a lot of people. So
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it's one of those that because so many people recommend it and it is so high on the list that people should experience it at least once
Yeah.
Mhm.
to understand when other people are talking about it or whatever. But it's not necessarily for everyone. Obviously, Conesy is not someone that is super excited to play it.
I mean, there's a lot of game themes that people have, like, for whatever reason, it just doesn't resonate with them, or they have something with maybe their moral outlook of the world or whatever, that like that style of
Mhm.
game isn't for them. I definitely am in this, like, that whole Victorian age thing, and does not resonate with me for a whole number of issues.
Mhm.
Yep. No, makes sense.
So it's fair to say that your pick, Ben, is not going to be set in the Victorian age.
No, my pick is definitely not. And anybody that's listened to any or any of our lists of top number one games of all time, this game's not going to be any surprise, and that is Terra Mystica from Fierland Spiel / distributed here in the U.S. by Capstone Games. And Terra Mystica is a very make-believe world of elves and mermaids and fantasy giants and fantasy races, where they're all basically trying to terraform the land. Somehow they're magically terraforming the land to suit what their race or their faction wants the land to be. So giants want mountains, witches and elves want forests, mermaids want water, etc., etc. And the game has this very interesting balance between how you spend resources to terraform the land, as well as spending resources to construct structures that enable you eventually to establish cities, and ultimately you're scoring points, and there's all sorts of different ways and various methods to do all of these things. For me, it's a game that I'm very intuitive to. I think the first time I played Terra Mystica, if I didn't win, I was probably second place. It was a game that I immediately, like, boom, I understand this game, I got it, and I was really into it. It's got a couple of great expansions. I love both of them. The Fire and Ice expansion, I feel like, is a must add to the Terra Mystica base game. Like, if you buy Terra Mystica, you should just go buy Fire and Ice right away, because it addresses a couple of things in the base game that needed a little tweaking and makes the game just better. And then the Merchants of the Sea expansion, which came out relatively recently, is an expansion that, while I don't think you need it, I think it adds some really cool elements and changes up the gameplay and makes Terra Mystica unique in the Terra Mystica family of games, which is why it's still reigning as my favorite all-time game, even though there are a couple of other variants.
Yeah, speaking of those other ones, see, they've got a couple versions: Gaia Project, Age of Innovation, and I guess you could count Terra Nova. Do you have a favorite of one of those?
I can tell you which one I don't like out of that batch. Terra Nova is definitely on that I do not like. It is a great, if you're looking for a simpler introduction to Terra Mystica, go get it. If you want to play Terra Mystica with some kids or something, like some younger people, sure, go get it. But it falls way short of the actual Terra Mystica experience, in my opinion. Of Gaia Project and Age of Innovation, I'm going to gravitate more to Age of Innovation. It is effectively Terra Mystica 2.0. It's taken some of the concepts that were in Gaia Project, as well as concepts that were in Terra Mystica and its expansions, and then just embellished them. But Age of Innovation, for me, hasn't replaced Terra Mystica yet, because I just haven't gotten enough plays of it. And I know it's available to play on Board Game Geek and a number of other places, but I could play it online, but I'm really reserving the opportunity to play Age of Innovation at the tabletop in person a few more times before I dive into the online play a bit. And plus, well, I haven't won Age of Innovation yet, so there, take that.
That's the only one of those that I would enjoy playing with you because, well, okay, not enjoy. I will enjoy playing the other games, but I'm not competitive against you because you just blow me out of the water. Like
I
there's no hope of winning
I do
against
have
you. So
I do feel that way a bit when I play Terra Mystica against in the physical copy on the tabletop, because at my, I don't know, probably 100 plays or so of Terra Mystica now, I have definitely got a methodology to the way I play that puts me pretty consistent at a points range that for people who don't play it a lot, it makes it very hard for them to beat. Yeah. So I try to I kind of like, I know like there are factions that I either don't know real well in Terra Mystica, or that I know are some of the factions that that people feel are poor factions or bad factions in the game, which it does have some thought process that there are certain factions that are less competitive than others in the game. And I will try to play those when I'm playing at the physical tabletop, just because it's kind of a self-handicap, just so that everybody else feels like they have a chance to be more competitive in the game. And that is definitely a drawback, and it has made tabling Terra Mystica harder for us because of that factor.
Yeah.
I was really quick. I say it also doesn't work too well as a two-player either,
No.
Matt. Right. So
Yeah, it's not a. It is definitely a game that needs 3 to 5 players really to, because the map doesn't feature any scaling, and there's not enough other scaling factors, which was addressed in Age of Innovation, and I absolutely love what they did there. I wish they would have introduced something like that in Terra Mystica for lower player counts.
Yeah. The funny thing is Terra Mystica is like a theme that I should really enjoy. I mean, it is definitely a little bit more. The theme's a little bit more abstract. So if you're thinking like if we were going to compare this to say Brass that we just talked about, Brass is a very definitive theme, and this has that sort of like fantasy thing, but like I feel like the rest of it's a little bit more abstracted for me. But ultimately, I struggle to enjoy this game, and I think the way I struggle and is because there is I mean, if you have, like I said, a skill, I think what Suzanne sort of alluded, if you have a skilled player, there is a sort of right way to play each race. And if it at the end, it almost ends up feeling a little spreadsheety to me. I need to do these 4 things on my first turn. I need to do these 5 things on my second turn. I need to do, this things on and that almost tears it apart for me a little bit, because like, I think in other games, that interaction between other players, it's like, "Oh, Justin built this thing in this place. Well, now I need to go do something different. So I'm gonna pick a totally different direction." And for that, those races, and I'm trying not to dissuade, like, there are definitely Ben and I have talked about this, like, there are people that are way more skilled than Ben that blow him out of the water. So for us, it's a completely, like, it depends on what level you're playing at, right? But I feel like in some of the other Euros that I've played, if, like, say, Justin is cornering the market on X, I can pick a new direction and not feel handicapped. Whereas I feel like in Terra Mystica, there is a right path to play a race. And if you don't, your engine's blown and you're just kind of dead in the water. At least that's how it feels to me. There probably is, if I had 100 plays like Ben, I'd probably have other tricks in my toolbox to say, I can take this slight right-hand turn, or I can do this and bring myself back on course. But that's just kind of the feel for me, and then it feels a little out of my hands. But I think some of that might be my inexperience with the game. So just being fair, because I think I've only played it maybe 4 times total. So
Yeah, no, I absolutely get it. And it's one of those things that like Suzanne mentions, I've played it almost too many times, so that when people sit down at the table with me, they feel like it sucks to sit down and play a game, any game, and you sit down and you're like, well, I'm pretty confident I can't win. Like, before we even started the game, I'm pretty confident that just due to sheer experience with this game, another player at the table is going to win. But besides that, like, some of the points you bring up are, I think, points that I see that are common in a lot of this style, the Euro style of game. That there is oftentimes very little forgiveness if you don't do, say, the set prescribed things
Mhm.
at the beginning of the game. There are a number of games that I think of that are this way, where it all of a sudden becomes really easy to be blown out. Games like some of the ones we mentioned right away when we were talking about games that are iconic in this genre, like Puerto Rico, like Agricola, like Zulkin. Like, you can be detrimentally set back, still have a great time with the game. You might still have a decent engine running by the end of the game, but when you look at the end of the game score, you're not even in contention, right? And that is like, I feel like that's an unfortunate side effect a lot of times with particularly some of the more complex Euro games, is that you can very easily, if you don't take the right steps early in the game, set yourself up for a game where it's very easy to not be competitive. And it's almost a game. These are games, oftentimes Euro games are games where after a third or fourth play, it's very easy to see, like, players who are playing that same game for the first time being at a disadvantage against players who have played the game 2 or 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say for Terra Mystica and other games too, along the same point that Ben's making, is that if I'm going into it and kind of have an inkling that I'm not going to win, I have the least amount of experience to these expert
Mhm.
players, whatever, I go in to just kind of play my own game and just see where my score ends up at the end. Pick a strategy, see if it works,
Yep.
and just enjoy the mechanics of the game versus trying to win. If, like, it's not that I don't want to be competitive, it's just I'm going to set realistic expectations for myself
Oh,
and
yeah.
set a goal. But Justin, I know you've played Terra Mystica.
Yeah, I
So,
enjoy Terra Mystica quite a lot. I think when I'm playing up against Ben or someone who does have a ton of experience, like, generally I just sort of trick myself into thinking that I will be competitive and just
that
maintain
way.
ridiculous confidence that somehow I'll be able to pull it out.
Yeah.
But, having experience playing a lot of different games, like, helps as well, even if it's not a game I've played a ton of. Like, I know how to play games. So,
Mhm.
and then there's always the fallback of just copy what Ben does.
Well, that may or may
Well,
not work for you in Terra Mystica because
yeah.
the
Yeah,
faction,
different
like,
races, yeah.
because the factions are set up in Terra Mystica the way they are, they're very cookie cutter. So there becomes a very, this faction probably has, like, you want to do, like, oh, this faction you want to build, you want to go to, and get your stronghold out earlier,
Yeah,
or oh, this faction you definitely want to get all of your temples out early, or whatever the case might be. There's a lot of that in base Terra area in Terra Mystica,
yep.
whereas like a game like Age of Innovation, that is all kind of randomized at the start of the game.
Mhm.
Like, you can take like, there's an optional variant rule where you can take the randomization out. I don't like that because then it just lets players pick the best possible combination.
Yeah,
Yeah.
optimize there, yeah.
And instead of letting that optimization letting that randomization, I think that puts players at a much more even footing for the start of the game.
Mhm.
But it's still, if you when and I think this Age of Innovation is going to hold true with it. If you don't, like, okay, I got this combination, that combination, you're going to have to read that board and then take those correct first 2 or 3 steps
Yeah.
if you're going to want to have that winning score.
Mhm.
And yes, Terra Mystica is definitely a game. When I play it on Board Game Arena, particularly in arena mode, I get rounds. I'm lucky if I can get a third or fourth place win most of the time, or a third or fourth place position, not a win, most of the time when I play online. So it is definitely a game that, yeah, while I have a lot of experience playing it, it's definitely that showcases that experience with a game, particularly when like these more complex Euro games. And I would have bet you Brass would be the same thing, and some of these other games will be the same thing. Like you'll see, more experience with a game, the better you get at it.
Mm-hmm. No, I'd agree with that.
All right, Suzanne, what do you got?
Oh, what do I have? This is one that I know the three of you absolutely love.
Yeah, I mean,
It's it's Scythe by Stonemaier Games. It was published in 2016. This is a game that I have just grown to really enjoy the more and more I play it, including our campaign version of the game we recently played. So, Scythe, for those of you who have not seen the game or played the game, it's set in an alternate history of the 1920s. So, think of everything that was going on then, and then you have all these mechs and advanced technology. So instead of having rounds and phases, it's what they call a streamlined action selection mechanism. So you just keep going around the table, selecting actions and choosing what you want to do. There's no, hey, this is round one or round two. One thing I really like about a lot of Euro games that are higher on my list are the asymmetrical factions. And not only does this have asymmetrical factions, it has asymmetrical player boards. So you have a whole bunch of different combinations. You can either choose to randomize what your player board is, your faction is, or pick one. So you could make a really strong combination based on what your faction likes to do, or what your goals are for the game. If you set yourself some different personal goals and who else is playing. Yeah, so the randomizing of the factions does make it maybe less intense zero than if you're picking it, but that lets you have some strategy as a player. This one, most of the Euro games for us do not have conflict. This does have some conflict if you seek it out, but you are secretly bidding. So there is strategy to this conflict. It's not just who is stronger. So it's choices that you make throughout the game that will help you succeed in the bit of conflict over some territories and resources there. You do have a lot of control over your fate and picking which, you have a hidden objective cards you can use, what you're going to focus on, where do you want to try and earn your points from. That definitely comes out in this game. There is some luck or variability a little bit in these encounter cards you get when you reach certain territories first, but on that you still have a choice depending on what you want to pursue. How mean do you want to be to the settlers? So with as you are upgrading your actions, which is something that you can do as part of it, as part of your actions, is you can upgrade them. You can build these engines, a bit like, hey, if I go here with this action, I can get my resources. I go there, I can spend them to build mechs. So you can have this nice control over your efficiency. And then another thing is, I think I would still like this game even without the components and this nice size, giant size of a board, but it does really add to the feel of the game for me. There are, there are downsides to this game. I've played this enough with seasoned and veteran players that when you have someone who doesn't know the game yet and you have someone who's played the game a bunch, it feels extremely lopsided, which we were talking about with Ben's pick. You almost want to play it twice with that new player so that they're on more even footing. And some of the factions I found, they do play a little bit better when you have more players at the higher player counts. If you're in a two-player game and you're picking a faction that does need to interact with another faction and you're on opposite ends of the board, it's a lot easier for them to just stay away from you. So, and then, I mean, this is my favorite Euro game, but it's also one that I never win. I always lose. Or, as Albert Einstein's quote that I found is that, if I don't win, I never lose because I either win or I'm learning. So
Mhm.
there's your quote
So,
for the day, people.
so you said a couple of things that I resonate with me there that I didn't really think about with Scythe. This game definitely doesn't play as satisfying at lower player counts, which is probably one of the reasons why we again don't get this game to the table as much. But we did just play it a bunch, so hey, there's that. We have a bunch of plays this year. The faction asymmetry as well. Well, I agree with you. I love asymmetry in factions, but it gives certain factions, like, they need certain things. And as well as where they start on the map means that each faction probably has like some resource that they don't have, that they're resource starved on, which depending on which player match you maybe get paired with, your faction may be a big hindrance for you in the game. But I think, there was one thing inside that I see a lot of complaints about this one, so this is a very common complaint about Scythe, is the fact that at the end of the game just ends and it's completely out of your control. When somebody puts that 6-star down, that's it. Game's over. Doesn't matter if you didn't, like, your next turn, you were able to put 2 stars on the board. Sorry, you don't get a turn even now, and you got less turns than the other players. Like,
I
to
love that
me,
aspect.
it is a love or a hate, right?
Mhm.
But the fact that I got one less turn than you did, and the fact that one turn, like one turn might be 10 or 15 points of scoring, that's a big deal in my mind. And that stinks a bit, especially when you're playing, because this game scales to 7 players with 9 possible unique different faction combinations. That can present, like, if you're playing a 7-player game and you're basically haven't interacted with the player, or even, because there's so much going on in a 7-player game, that the opposite side of the table where that faction is or those players are, they're kind of having their own kind of mini game inside the game because they're all interacting with each other and they end it over there. That really sucks, and I've seen that happen. I shouldn't say it sucks. In the games that it happened, it didn't suck for me, but it sucked for some of those other players, and they were a little upset about it because it's like, oh, if I would have had one more turn, I'd have scored 7 more points or 10 more points or whatever.
Mhm.
But like Scythe, like as far as a territory control game, where like yes, there's player combat, like you attack other players and stuff like that actually in the game. This game is one of the best territory control games I've ever played, and that's saying something because it's not like, while there's incentive to attack other players, it's not like you have to win the game,
Mhm.
which is awesome. And if you lose a fight to another player, it's not like absolutely detrimental like it is in some territory control games.
Well, and sometimes you want to lose the fight because you can then recall your workers or your mechs back to your home territory.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly. You might be you're overstretched, and you're like, oh hey, well, I need to kind of get this back here. So if this player attacks me, then I'm gonna fall. Then it'll fall back, and then I'll be in a position to redeploy that on my next turn in a position
Mhm.
where I need it again. Like Scythe has that, where very few games that have territory control in them actually do that.
Yeah. The the way it ends, I think, has always been the most painful thing for me because thematically, I want to like the game. I've played it 2, maybe 3 times, but it's the ending that always feels so abrupt to me. And I think it's my inexperience with the game that has really hurt me with this one. Is I think I probably played different factions each time. I never really understood the engines of either side. And I feel like I played for 4 hours. I was just starting to understand it, and then the game's over. And then it's like, okay, what did I do with 4 hours? And it's that abrupt ending that kills me every time, because I'll be like, oh shit, they're gonna end the game on their turn, and I'm just starting to understand my engine. I'm just starting to get points on the table, and then it's over.
Wow, it takes you 4 hours? I would be frustrated in 4 hours too. It's like usually like a 2-hour game, I think, for
I've
me.
never played it in 2. I've never played a game of
Okay,
Scythe in 2. I think it's always been long, and it might be because there were multiple, like, inexperienced players at the table. Because I mean, I
gotcha.
for something in that game disconnects in my head with how the engine works, and I don't know why.
Sure.
So I mean, I like Ben said, it's territory control wise, there are some aspects of the game that I do like and that work really well, but something in that game is just broken in my head, and it's probably my inexperience with the game, my opinion. So
Yeah. Justin, you've played this too.
Yeah, I have played a fair bit of Scythe. I did play through a Rise of Fenris campaign and have played a couple, one-offs outside of that. On one side, I really like the theme and aesthetics. Like the setting of the game is super cool. The art, the miniatures, I really, really like that. I really enjoy doing those encounter events that make you kind of choose an action to take to gain some resources. Sometimes you're like de-escalating a situation. Sometimes you just like, nope, I'm going to be the bad guy here and get some stuff that I want, steal this stuff from the villagers or whatever. So those are always a fun. Like I think people kind of race out onto the map to get those, which I find a fun aspect of the game. And I really like the player board upgrades. Like any game that lets you do little like upgrades to your actions in your player board, that's so satisfying to me. But, during the campaign, I struggled a lot with the faction that I ended up with for, I think I played Saxony for most of the campaign. I ended up switching at some point to another faction, just the way the campaign works. I think, some factions, and I think Saxony specifically is a faction that part of the way that it works to run that faction, you kind of want to race to the end of the game. You want to push conflicts and like push that quick ending to be successful with that faction. And this just wasn't a play style that kind of jived with me. And I think a lot of the other players too wanted to play longer games and gather resources, and because that's how their factions worked and how their combination of boards ended up being a lot of the times. So it's a mixed kind of thing for me. Like I'm in that category of like I really want to like this game. Like there's so many things I like about it, but I do struggle with it. And I think ultimately it's just like it works better as a single session type of game for me where I could get a new faction combination or a new faction and board combination that works really well together and just try a different play style. Getting stuck with the same faction for multiple plays was kind of rough for me. So
I think you'll
Yeah.
find out soon what the rest of the WiscoDice team, at least Suzanne and I, think of the campaign mode for Scythe on our YouTube channel, where we're going to be doing a full review of that. So, and we will earmark when we go into spoiler mode in that video so that you can find out what we thought of the campaign and whether you should get it or not, and then we'll go into spoiler mode in that video. So stay tuned for that. If you haven't already liked and subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do that today. Just head right on over to YouTube, find WiscoDice, and like, subscribe, smash that like button.
I guess that leaves it to me and my pick. I'll tell you, it starts with an A, but it's not Agricola. I do talk about I do talk about Agricola a lot, but I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? I it my favorite Euro game as of today is Anachrony from Mind Clash Games. Anachrony is a sci-fi themed time travel worker placement Euro game, and the first thing that gets me about it is the theme and aesthetics. So the setup for the game is there's this mysterious cataclysmic explosion that basically causes the surface of the world to be uninhabitable. There's this resource, this substance called neutronium that's discovered that allows the manipulation of time, and an asteroid made from neutronium is headed for the planet. And the way that it works in the story is that the collision of this asteroid in the future is what caused the explosion in the past because of this time travel mineral that it's made up of. Basically, after the sort of end of the world, you are one of these few remaining factions in the world that needs to gather resources and use time manipulation basically ensure that you are the kind of dominant faction before this asteroid that's coming will eventually hit the Earth and kind of wipe out everything. So basically, there's a point in the game where you play a bunch of rounds and then an asteroid hits, changes the game board, and kind of pushes it into the end game state. So theme is awesome. It has these big, beautiful mech miniatures that you play with that you use to take actions on these sort of destroyed central city in the game because it's like a dangerous wasteland. So you need to send your workers out in these protective exosuits to go take actions there. So theme and aesthetics really, really get me on this one. And then mechanically, it's a worker placement game, which is generally my favorite Euro game mechanic. It's kind of like what makes a Euro game for me work. It has some customization and building. You have individual player boards that you build buildings onto, which give you bonuses or special actions that you can take, as well as end game points. And then, of course, there's this time travel mechanic. So basically, you get to borrow resources from yourself in the future. So on any given round, you can basically start the round and say, you know what, I need some uranium, I need some gold, maybe I need an extra worker this round. So you can just take those things at the beginning of the round. But the trick is you're borrowing that stuff from yourself literally in the future. So in a future round, you're gonna have to pay back those resources to yourself or risk some time anomalies that'll mess you up. If you do this too many times or you're doing it more than other players, you can get these anomalies which screw up your player board and cost you some points and stuff like that. So there's this risk reward thing of like, well, I really want to get my engine going, so let me just take a couple free things from the future, and then you got to pay it back later. There's, personal and shared game goals. Each faction has their own kind of specific objective they're aiming to accomplish by the end of the game. So there's some nice asymmetry there. For example, one of the paths is called the Path of Harmony, and their whole thing is by the end of the game, they basically need to have 3 of these water production buildings. Water is an important resource, at the end of the world that people need. And then they get additional points for having combinations of gold as a resource and what they call geniuses. There's these 4 different worker types, and geniuses is one of these 4 workers. So you sort of have this recipe per faction of like what you're going to score for at the end of the game, while also having public objectives to compete on as well. And then like in terms of like complexity and stuff, it's mid heavy, I would say, in complexity, which really to me hits like a really good sweet spot. It's not overly complicated. The time travel thing is a little, you got to get your head around it a little bit, but ultimately it's kind of boils down to just taking debts and having to pay those off later. So like just kind of hits all my buttons and is one I really enjoy. There's also a bunch of expansions for it. So, when you get bored of playing the base game, you got other stuff to do too. So, always enjoy that.
I think you should have stuck with Agricola.
I mean, it is probably a close second. It's a tough one for me. I'd probably change my mind on a different day.
I mean, that is one of my all-time favorites too.
Yeah.
So I absolutely get it. I mean, that struggle to collect enough resources, have to feed your family constantly, that classic UE game, like it's awesome. It's just awesome. Absolutely, one of my favorites. But Anachrony is, and it's a game I have definitely gotten to enjoy more of each time I play it. And I think that's partially because each time I play it, I relearn the game, and between what I recall about how to play it plus relearning the game, I am able to understand how to play the game better. So that understanding then means now I'm actually trying to play the game versus trying to focus on those mechanics. A common theme that we're having said over and over about these Euro games is that there is definitely a aspect to repeat play before you may find out you really like a game, like a Euro game, or dislike a Euro game. But I think it's also a game that I tend to let others oftentimes play versus myself. Like, I know it's came out the last couple of years at CabinCon. And that's partially because Justin did an amazing job painting those exosuits, right? They look absolutely awesome. But the theme is not one that resonates for me. I love this time travel aspect. I don't necessarily care for big exosuits and some of the other kind of end of the world kind of theming. I'm in trying to get my faction in perspective. In contrast, like a Legacy Gears of Time, which is another amazing time travel mechanic game, I like better because it doesn't necessarily but it does things in more of like a card. I mean, you might be traveling back in time in exosuits and that, but it doesn't matter because it's all cards and you can pretend in your head whatever you want it to be. So there's that, and I think some of that, like just the way the game looks visually, it doesn't necessarily appeal to me. But the gameplay, like I said, every time I play it, I'm looking forward to playing this one because the gameplay has really made up for that, because as I understand the game more and I enjoy this game more, the gameplay definitely stands out on this one. It's definitely one that I would, if you're into great game mechanics and a game that has great mechanisms and leverages time travel, this is definitely one that I would point to and say, hey, you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, this game also, like with Cozy, this game grows on me the more I play it. The problem is I've only played it in person twice, so I've been trying to play it online, and it's a little difficult for me to play it online because I need to see what other people are doing, and if you're not playing it in real time, that is a little difficult, and you just don't have the same, I don't know, look and feel of the game. This happens to me a lot with Euro games. If I don't know them inside and out, playing them online is always difficult. But this, for me, I like the theme. This kind of dystopian kind of future, time travel, sci-fi, like that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
great.
I
Like if
can
this
see
game
that.
was a movie, or a TV show, I would be watching it. So, but I do like this game. We don't own it, so I don't get to play it all that often. Hint, hint, Justin, bring it over. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's a good game. It's definitely one for people to check out.
See, I have never seen this one, but you had me at time traveling exosuits, and now I have to see Justin's paint jobs. So, I mean, it sounds cool. I'm fascinated to see it sometime.
Yeah, I think too, like I would definitely say there is a board presence aspect of this game, especially with the mechs, which are unnecessary to play the game. Like totally, they don't. There's no
Uh,
mechanical reason to have them in
they're
the game.
necessary because
That's
they're
what I'm saying.
cool.
I think they truly are necessary to establish the theme and presence of the game on the board. And I could see how playing this online would be really unsatisfying. Like to me, the mechs and using them, like you actually physically, so you have these little worker chits that are like cardboard tokens, and to go take an action on the main board, you have to take one of your worker types, stick them inside a slot in the mech, and then take the whole mech over to the worker space on the board. So like it's just like you're like getting in the suit and going to the board. So to me, that board presence is actually pretty important, like for this one, for just making it satisfying to play. So I could definitely see where online it just doesn't scratch the itch as much. I'll have to try it online though myself and see, having some plays if it's as good. But
By the way, I'm pretty confident if you want to see some of those cool paint jobs of Justin's that they'll be in the show notes for this episode. So just head over to WiscoDice.com to check those out while you're listening to the segment. And with that, I think we are done with today's episode. So we started off with all of our favorite Euro games, and we covered Brass Lincolnshire, which is an amazing, amazing Euro game. We then hit on Terra Mystica, and again, my favorite game of all time, but not necessarily everybody's favorite. Touched on Scythe from Stonemaier Games, one of the best territory control games out there, leveraging great Euro mechanics. And Of course, Anachrony from Mind Clash Games, which is awesome game with exosuits and time travel. So all sorts of different themes in today's games, all sorts of different mechanics in today's games, but also all very, very good Euro games. So with that, thank you all so much for listening.
Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you leave a review of this show wherever your favorite place is to find podcasts. Oh, and by the way, give us a like on our Facebook page. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, or Pinterest while you're at it. If you haven't looked recently, make sure you catch up on the blog at WiscoDice.com. Hey, Brian, what's that site?
Oh, darn, I forget. Justin, what's our website again?
WiscoDice.com.
That's right, it's WiscoDice.com. And until next time, everyone, peace out.